Hello, system thinkers. Welcome to episode 78. This is the recap call with my good friend, Kacey Wood. Kacey, thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
We spoke last week. We actually got on a call with Tony Ann, and we were just chatting a little bit. And one of the questions that you asked us last week is really what kind of prompted all of this week's episode, which was if design systems was a college degree, what would be in that course structure? And I think, of course, your mind sort of defaults to components and tokens and all the assets and all of that. But you had a different thought. Can you share just sort of like what you were wondering in that area?
Absolutely. To your point, when I think of design systems initially, maybe a few years back when I started this career, I'm thinking about those IC fundamentals. But throughout my time, I've learned that there's really the second thing that matters just as much, which is that people layer. And so I commonly am asking myself, how am I positioning my questions and my arguments? How am I also staying humble, but also knowing when to push and pull back and get buy-in for like an idea? And so I've also been able to see these characteristics from people in industry like yourself, Ben, and Tony Ann. And I'm just like acknowledging, these are some skills that I would love to learn. And then I would love to see courses for these type of materials, because a lot of this is determining, you could build a really quality product, but if you don't have these personal skills, it may not be as successful as you were intending.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I think it's perhaps 2/3 of the work, is this stuff. So the title for this episode was The Psychology of Design Systems. We asked 4 questions of folks. And so I'll just quickly read those questions in case you're listening to this and you didn't actually participate. No problem at all. We want to make sure we get you the content that we have. And so the first question was you had to choose one of a series of options. And the question was, what part of the organization does your design system team live within? The second question was similar, choosing one of several options. And that question was, which group tends to push back on your design system the most? And then we had 2 open-ended questions. The first of those was, what tactics have you successfully used to build buy-in for your system? And then the final question, tell us about a time someone convinced you to change your mind about a system decision. What did they actually do that worked on you? And actually, Kacey, I'm going to put you on the spot. Will you answer that last question for us? Like tell me about a time when somebody changed your mind.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So I was thinking about through this, and especially in the design systems world, it's very back and forth. You're constantly the one who is trying to convince someone else, but then there's a lot of consumers, a lot of contribution, people trying to contribute back into the system. So you also find yourself on the receiving end. And so what I've found in how I, are able to scope my mindset is when it kind of relates back to Tony Ann's talk about craft and care. When I see someone provide that care and, the thought process and a reasoning behind things, I'm willing to be flexible and open to see it through, especially something that I'm trying to do in my time as well is if we're trying something, almost also have an escape route. So if this doesn't work out, we have an idea, like we have a plan B on how to move it forward. But I think we live in a world of innovation. Why not try to be innovative and accept new ideas? But let's think through those first. And I didn't realize I was doing this, but I typically feel more open when ideas are shared with a little bit more context and research.
Yeah. Gosh, the idea of an escape route, that's fascinating to me. It almost like I'm thinking of like a pressure relief valve, where it's like, if you can relieve the pressure of like, this choice is the only choice, then I think you kind of get folks into a place where they can stay a little bit more curious, So that's really cool, actually. We didn't even talk about that in the deep dive, but that's a great concept.
It reminds me of the question a little bit. We were talking about the reactance theory, which I'm happy to talk through that as well. But
for sure.
We were talking about, here, I'll give like a background of what reactance theory was. So it was one of those behavioral concepts that actually helped spun up this idea of the psychology and design systems, where it's talking about this, an automatic motivational response to a perceived threat to your freedom or autonomy. So it's in a use case where if I always say this example with my sister, if I was telling my sister to do something, she would feel that her choice of freedom was being revoked from her. So she would ultimately result to the opposite of what I was saying because that is what her choice is. So like if I told her to eat something, I was like, sushi's really good, you should try it. And I'm like telling her that she has to do that. She would say, no, I will never try that. And then decides to do it on her own and says, oh, this is actually great. And so we were talking about that concept on the call today. And this is around the same concept of maybe opening, instead of saying something specific that you should be doing something, provide those choices. Janessa talked about this with the Design System Initiative, where she said, you don't have to use the system, but it's there. Here are the benefits of it. You can choose not to and learn on your own.
Yeah, I loved that. I loved that. And it is, in a sense, it's kind of what you said earlier, which is like, there's an out, that we're like relieving the pressure of like, this is your only choice, which I think is just so smart. So I love that. Walk us through some of these other frameworks too. So, or these other sort of psychological concepts that you dropped into the Fig Jam.
Absolutely. So these were just, as I was deep diving into the behavioral concepts, these were things that I could be able to associate to, an experience. So this first one, endowment effect, or like the status quo bias. So it's this concept of people are just overvaluing what they already know, and they don't want to give that up. And I see this a lot with tooling, especially with like iterations of a design system. If you are working on a design system that you know really well, you've already went through the education, you're using it, and then this new version comes out and it requires you to put in effort to move to the new version, even though it is like the perfect system, you're going to get some pushback on that because that effort to move forward into that other, it's like, why would I do that if this is, it's working fine?
Yeah. It's almost just like resistance to change,
Yeah,
So, gosh, it's so funny. It's like, okay, so we didn't talk about this in the deep dive either, but reactance theory in my mind, at least in my experience, I think I feel that the most as a parent, like with my kids. And for you, is it your younger sister, right?
Your sister. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if there's something there connected to youth, right? And then the endowment effect to me feels like it applies to folks maybe who are a little bit set in their ways, which I tend to think of maybe a little bit older. They've got more experience, so they have solutions for things already, So I don't know if that's true or not, but that's sort of how it's starting to kind of feel to me. So interesting.
I love that.
All right. Curse of knowledge. What is this?
This was actually related to what Guy was mentioning today, but the curse of knowledge is once you know something deeply, you can't remember not knowing it. And so, especially for us design system experts, you can overestimate some of those like really deep concepts that we're in the weeds in every single day. And like, I remember I did this my first day here at Tabs where I mentioned like tokens, and like someone goes, you're going to have to explain tokens to me. What do you mean tokens? Like, you mean like a medallion? And I'm like, no, like, and then I started deep diving into the concept of it. And I said, this is too much. Like I need to be able to try to speak a little bit more higher level of the concepts I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. Goodness gracious. It's funny because I think about this a lot when I'm thinking about writing something. I think this sort of like this, just like, it doesn't have to be systems related, like anything that I've learned that I just want to like put it out there. I always, everybody who writes, I think has that sort of moment where it's like, is this worth putting out there? Mm-hmm. And then, you read something like this and you realize that like what is really valuable to somebody who's on the same journey and just a little bit behind you. But it's probably not super valuable to someone if you're very advanced who's just coming into the scene, right? Like there's like this, you have to be like just enough further ahead. And that means everybody has something to share, right? Because there's people all along that journey. So that's kind of cool. It's like a positive spin on what this could be sort of one of the psychological challenges of systems work. So really interesting one.
Yeah.
Okay, social proof. What do you got there?
Oh, yeah. So this one's really interesting. So people adopt what they see other peers adopting. So I think this concept is actually seen through, and I've never realized this until like when I was looking into it, but the concept of a design system advocate group. So you're almost taking like a smaller test size study. You're testing things with them. You're allowing them to be able to put the work that you've done into motion, show the value of it, and then you'll start to see other teams seeing that success and want buy-in as well.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, this came up a lot in question 3. It's funny because I think what we didn't do this, but we could easily have gone through all of these sort of theories that you kind of presented and connected them to the specific answers folks gave for question 3, which was, what tactics are you using to help sort of get more buy-in? But we had this idea of evidence and social proof right here. So somebody said, teams are using it and are happy with it, and it helps them do better work. So someone else to advocate for us, which is exactly what you just said. So another one was successful integration and implementation with one major product, word of mouth, essentially, like peers are the sellers in that scenario, you know? So that's really cool. Like these things, these theories, whether people recognize they're doing it or not, are totally showing up in the open text answers that folks gave. Okay, IKEA effect. This one I love because we had somebody on the call who was actually assembling IKEA furniture with their camera off and listening in. I mean, come on. We could not have planned that.
I know when you said that, I was like, do I have the behavioral fact for you?
Yeah.
But this one's so, I find myself doing this one as well. But what IKEA effect is saying is that it's the bias where people place a high value on a product or something in specific that they helped create, because they're part of the story, they're part of it as a whole. And so this is where I see contribution to the system so valuable. You not only are able to start to increase the system, like you can be able to find pathways to build components and tokens that are needed, but you're also starting to get buy-in for the system because people are they're having the identity of it to be part of themselves as well, because they're able to add to it.
Yeah, that's great. I love this. I think this plays out for me in my work with teams where when we're starting a system, which it doesn't happen too often anymore that we get to start from nothing, but when we are, we do this work to go discover the existing systems that are already at play all over the org. So whether they think they have a system or not, everybody has many, many little systems, right? And many times they're not identified as a design system. It's just some designer somewhere wants to be smart about how they work. And so they're systematic in their approach, So we identify all those little systems, and then we work with the folks who've created those to convert them into something more systematic that can work for others too. So that's this idea of like bringing them into the work. It's like 3 birds with one stone, because right out of the gate, you get good work. There's something systematic to work with. You have some raw material. You also get somebody to help you build it, right? And they become an advocate, so it's just like the best way to do this work. This also reminds me of another thing. So there's this old book called Flow. Is that a book you've heard of?
I have not.
Okay. I'll have to look it up. I think it might be like an Eastern European author who did all this research on the flow state. And there's one chart in this book that sticks with me. And it's this idea of like, if things are too hard, it stops you from being able to make progress. But if they're too easy, you also can't get into the flow state. And so there's this balance of difficulty that you have to manage of like, that kind of is like the sweet spot to stay in flow. And this is so I'm just asking you this, like, have you found that if you make it too easy for people to adopt or too easy for them to come on board, they're just like, not interested?
I love this question. Usually my motto with design systems is make it so easy to use, you can't not use it.
Yeah.
And so when I say that, sometimes I found like when it's so easy to use, like people don't really realize they're using it. So it's not that they're not bought into it. They just like don't really realize the value or the bigger picture of it, because they don't need to. They're not being told it like from time to time or having to be convinced.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say it's that they're just not bought in. It's just that, it's very side of mind, they're not focused on it.
Yeah. That's a good way. Maybe that's what it is. Yeah. It's just like a less of a recognition.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. We got one more foot in the door. What's this?
Yeah. So this one I'm starting to feel in my new role. This one's really interesting. So it's like a small yes leads to a bigger yes. So instead, like, I'm definitely working on this. I think very systematically, as we all do here in the systems world, where I'm thinking about the bigger picture and all the different things that need to be done in order to get to that goal. But sometimes that is a little scary for people who may be more in like the scoped type of role or want to think of things in increments. And so trying to get that buy-in, that different perspective between the two people, you may be saying the same thing, but meaning different things in your head.
Yeah.
And
Oof,
so,
that's
yeah.
so good.
hmm
Yeah, I love that. One little bit of consumption or subscription to the system can lead to so much more. And I think in this world, like getting a foot in the door means like how do we just broaden our understanding of what it means to adopt and make it so that any use, any kind of participation is a form of adoption. Obviously, that helps with your metrics too, right? So,
Yeah.
I also dropped in this one, which just came out of a conversation I was having with my youngest about college and stuff, and they mentioned that they were reading about Aristotle's modes of persuasion, and so I was like, okay, what is this? You've piqued my interest, and so this was like when you're trying to persuade or win someone over. Aristotle broke it down into these kind of three categories: ethos, character, meaning like to establish trust. You do things like show confidence, your experience, your morals, and then pathos, emotion. So to win an audience, like really, you have to tell stories and give imagery and emotive language, right? Connecting with them on a more personal level. And then logos, logic, meaning like an argument can be supported with references and data and case studies and all that kind of thing. So I thought this was a really kind of interesting way to sort of combine the different things that maybe we try, but say, how do we do a little bit of all of these in each approach, right? That might be like a healthy approach. I want us to get to this kind of very sort of philosophical question on influence versus manipulation, and what is the difference and what is the line? Will you kind of set the context for how this came up in the deep dive?
Yes, absolutely. So when I was thinking about this art of influence and how can you build the tactics in order to help people buy into your idea without feeling like you're triggering this, negative emotions, I started to realize, am I being too like tactical with my tactics, essentially? Like, am I thinking too much into this? Am I starting to run along the lines of manipulation? And I liked the idea of like, today we were talking about what's really this definition of influence and manipulation. And when I was thinking about this, manipulation to me is the question of, are you willing to lose? If that answer is no, then you're not asking this person or whoever you're interacting with to work with you. You are steering the direction and they're going to feel it even if they can't pinpoint that.
Yeah. Gosh, that's good. And as Guy always does, when we brought this question, he was like, hold on, are we asking the right question? Which, that's why we love Guy, right? Because he's always willing to question these things and challenge us. But he said, is influence versus manipulation the wrong question? And he was like, it feels like it's rooted in this concept that we as systems practitioners know better than our consumers, right? We're trying to convince them to come to our side in an argument or something. And so I thought that was actually really interesting. We had lots of other, folks kind of jump in, with ideas. Stephen said manipulation is dishonest or disingenuous, just disingenuous influence. So, I don't know, lots of thoughts. I was kind of leaning towards this idea of transparency as maybe a way to differentiate, where if you're trying to influence someone, you're clear and transparent about what it is that you want. Whereas manipulation is more like, you don't know what I'm trying to get you to do.
Yeah.
So who knows? We could do some more research here
Yeah.
on this one, but fascinating topic.
Yeah. The one thing I will say about this one too, I loved Amy's comment about hierarchy, because there also this play of all of this about all the other variables of hierarchy of the person that you're working with at the organization. There's also company values, team values. What are your goals? These all align to, if you're proposing something that goes against any of those fundamentals, the question is, are you going to be able to be as influential even if you're using those tactics or not?
Yeah, gosh, it's such a good point. And there's like a whole power dynamic there, right? Like folks with more authority, folks higher in the hierarchy of the org. I think that got us at some point onto a little conversation or somewhere in here around, here it is, around like, I think it was Tony Ann who said design systems make me a better person. You brought that quote of hers, but like what Amy's saying is like almost like getting at the psychological safety side of this,
Yeah.
and we've had conversations about that in the past. I posted one of the articles that's a result of one of our other sessions, but any thoughts on this? Or
It's These are things like what I'm trying to bring to this question is starting to think about things fundamentally about the skill set. But for the longest time in this world, is like these are innate things that you're just like learning and you don't realize that you're learning and you're slowly getting better at it. And so whether you're practicing them day to day during your work environment or you're also, being more social in life and you're meeting new friends, these are skills that you're starting to grow, and you're going to see that crossover between work and play. And so it's going to be very interesting to see like how everyone kind of grows based on those different types of experience.
Yeah, I love it that we are, I think, with the question, trying to build a space where we can have some of these harder conversations. This isn't something that's talked about that often. So we want this to be a place where folks can bring these kinds of ideas. Kacey, this is super cool. Is there any last little tidbit that you want to make sure we cover here?
Honestly, I think we covered it. The biggest thing that I would love as an output from this is starting to define common tactics of us as design systems, either designers, engineers, like people a part of the systems world, starting to create this, maybe the curriculum that we talked about at the beginning. Is there actually this a course that we could be able to build that helps that design systems designer or engineer get a foot in the door or like step up learning it before they enter into the field?
Yeah, gosh, I love it. We should take that to Redwoods, because I think there's so many folks there who understand that the challenges are so much beyond just creating, stuff in Figma or in code. So,
Yeah, exactly.
Kacey, thank you for bringing this question. Every time we talk, I walk away feeling like uplifted and positive. So it's really fun to do this with you. I know this was a little bit of a last minute one too. So thank you for jumping in, dropping other commitments to be able to do this. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll get you back on sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's been awesome.
Yep. We'll see you all on an episode coming up. Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Question. Remember, you can get access to the raw data, the collaborative Fig Jam, and all of the recordings for this episode and many more on my website, bencallahan.com. If you or your team could use an outside perspective in your design system efforts, I'd be honored to support you in that way. There's more information about my coaching and consulting offerings over on the site. And if you need a hand building a sustainable design system program, my studio, Sparkbox, is standing by ready to partner. Hiring Sparkbox is an investment in your design system and your team. Reach out and let's see if there's a good fit. Thanks for being here, and remember, stay in learning mode.